We are going to talk about Anne Bradstreet, who was America's first poet. She's America's first real published author in the kind of traditional sense that we think of it. Pretty astonishing. She had really worldwide success. European success anyway. She was very well liked. Even though she had to pretend she didn't know anything about how good she was. So let's talk about her, and we're going to kind of look at a representative sample of her poetry and talk about really what it shows us about what it meant to be Puritan. Remember, these were Puritans. They weren't scrooby separatists. She came over with Winthrop. She was actually on the Arbella. She heard that sermon. She would have actually heard him give that speech. So she wasn't born in New England. She was born in England, and her father had a pretty extensive library in which she was educated. Education, of course, was very big for Puritans in general, but she was educated more than she really, I guess, should have been for a British woman of her station. Her father really valued this kind of classical education, this Elizabethan tradition that really valued female education more so than, a lot of people of her time did. And she read widely, so it wasn't just, learning how to, count and then learning to read poetry and read the Bible. She read philosophers, she read classicists. So she would have been educated the way a male child would have been educated, which is pretty important. It is in keeping with Puritan belief to really educate girls, but she was educated beyond what most Puritan girls would have been educated. And she married before they came to the New World. And she wasn't really happy about coming to the New World. She had a pretty good life in England. She lived in a really nice house. She had a lot of relative comforts, access to a lot of things that people really would have considered to be, privileges at the time. And she was going to be coming to unknown dangers. She knew that a lot of people were probably going to suffer. Of course, we know that a lot of them starved to death. Just to kind of put this into context for you, she had 8 children in between the years 1633 and 1652, and they all lived in one house with both sets of in-laws. And they were kind of wealthy people. So she didn't want to do that, but she did anyway, because you're a Puritan and you don't complain. So she's on the Arbella. She knows the stories about what happened to the Puritans that came before, but she keeps her mouth shut because that's what you do. And of course, with the way that Puritans kind of believed women to be also, her writing basically represents for us a really good insight into kind of the balance you had to strike between your personal feelings and what you're allowed to feel, between what it's like to be a woman and what you're supposed to feel as a woman. So there's a lot of kind of good contrast between what she's writing and between what people like William Bradford are writing. They're telling the story that they're supposed to tell. And she kind of is too, but she's doing it in such a way that if we look between the lines, we have this great poetry that's really just about feelings. That's about what is it like when you lose your house? What is it like when this man that you love is gone all the time and you're left to deal with all these kids? What about when your kids keep dying? That kind of stuff. So she has all these kind of poems, but she also has poems about what is it like to be a Puritan? And how can you kind of try to describe that in a way that's not going to get you in a lot of trouble? Because let's be honest, And it's a balancing act. We know that, according to Tulip, you're supposed to really just accept this stuff. If you complain too much, it means that you are not elect, that you are going to be condemned to hell. So she has to really, really balance this. And of course, with spiritual tribalism, it would mean her entire family is condemned to hell. And you can't really have that when your family are kind of among the more elite families. So let's take a look at some of her poetry and see how she does this. And we're going to start in the prologue. And she's very funny once you get what she's doing. Okay. So she starts out here. To sing of wars, of captains, and of kings. Well, guys, she's doing an invocation to the muse. We have seen this before. I want you to think for a minute and see if you can remember where we've seen an invocation to the muse. If you thought, oh, De Villagra, you're correct. She's kind of doing the same kind of thing. Remember that classical history that she has. That's how a lot of epic poems started. And she's specifically referencing the Iliad and the Odyssey that started, I sing of arms and of men, that kind of thing. Of cities founded, commonwealths begun, for my mean pen are two superior things. So she's contradicting herself throughout this whole poem. She starts with this very overt reference to classical writing and classical, poetry, epic poetry. And then she says, oh, but I'm not going to do that. It's my mean pen to actually talk about wars of captains and kings and cities founded. I'm just a woman. I'm not going to write about that, please. Let poets and historians talk about that. She's very much saying right here, I'm not a poet. Let poets talk about that. My obscure line shall not so dim their worth. So if this sounds like false modesty to you, it should. It is very false modesty. She is very much a good poet and absolutely able to do this. But she has to talk about this. She has to say this. You're not allowed, first of all, to be boastful in Puritan society. But you're doubly not allowed if you're female. And yes, you were allowed to write poetry. That's a myth that you're not supposed to ever write poetry or anything like that. Remember, they had songs. But it's supposed to be done, at the end of the day when you're, tired and you barely have 10 minutes left to rest before bed. You're definitely not supposed to be putting any time into it. So let's go on. When my wondering eyes and envious heart great Bartus's sugared lines do but read o'er, fool, I do grudge the muses did not part twixt him and me that overflew it in store. A Bartus can do what a Bartus will, but simple I, according to my skill. So she's saying, oh, man, when I look at this great poet Bartus, who is, first of all, he was a French Protestant poet that all of the Puritans would know and they would really respect. So she's like, man, when I read his stuff, oh, it's so good. I just really wish that the muses, which again are the Greek muses, so she's not saying I wish God had given me this, because you would never ever question God. I know it can seem a little bit weird at first to think, well, why is she questioning what God did? Well, she's not. She would never say, why didn't God give me more poetic talent? She's just kind of this wistful, oh, I wish the muses had done that, had given me just a tiny, tiny amount of Bartus's skill. That'd be like going into a church today and saying, man, I wish I had just a little bit of Derry Falwell's, talent or something, whoever, somebody that they would, value. But again, she's writing this in perfect iambic pentameter. This is an incredibly talented poem, but she's constantly saying, oh, I'm so weak, I'm so bad. Part of this is a CYA thing. That way, if she does accidentally, well, not accidentally, if she insults somebody or gets under their skin, she'll be like, oh, I didn't mean to. I'm just a dumb lady, kind of thing. From schoolboy's tongue no rhetoric we expect, nor yet a sweet consort from broken strings, nor perfect beauty wears a main defect. My foolish, broken, blemished muse so sings, and this to mend, alas, no art is able, 'cause nature made it so irreparable. So again, same basic thing. Please don't expect these poems to be any good, that I'm writing perfectly and have this wonderful and cohesive, reference, throwback to, the Greek poets. I'm just dumb. I can't help it. God made me this way. I'm sorry. Brilliant. She's brilliant. And then later she says she's a weak and wounded brain. Ah, stanza 5. Fantastic. I am obnoxious to each carping tongue. Now here's where she's kind of letting her attitude come out a little bit, because she's calling her critics carping now. It's not so much, oh, I'm totally on your side, I get it, I'm awful. She's really starting to clap back a little bit. I am obnoxious to each carping tongue who says my hand a needle better fits. So again, these people who say I should be doing women's work and sewing. A poet's pen all scorn I should thus wrong, for such despite the cast on female wits. So in other words, they're saying, you're going to make all poets look bad because you're going to be so bad at poetry. Because you're a lady. If what I do prove well, it won't advance. They'll say it's stolen, or else it was by chance. So she's saying, I can't win. Even if I do write something that's really good, you're just going to say I stole it from a dude. So what do you want me to do? But sure, the antique Greeks were far more mild of our sex. So it's like, even those guys that we think are awful because they were dirty heathens who didn't even have Jesus, they were nicer than you guys are being. They had muses, and all their muses were women, is what she's saying here in the 6th stanza. But even that you're gonna dismiss. She said, the Greeks did not but play the fools and lie. So why are you talking about the Greeks? They're liars and dumb. That's what she's getting at there. Well, let Greeks be Greeks. Let them be fools and dumb. And women what they are. Men have precedency and still excel. It is but vain unjustly to wage war. Men can do best, and women know it well. Preeminence in all and each is yours, yet grant some small acknowledgement of ours. She's saying, is it going to hurt you if you let me be good at this one thing? I mean, you guys have everything, basically, is what she's saying. And oh, ye high-flown quills that soar the skies, and ever with your praise still catch your praise, if e'er you deign these lowly lines your eyes, give time or parsley wreath, I ask no bays. This mean and unrefined ore of mine will make your glistering gold but more to shine. But man, and even if you just read this, everybody will say, wow, she's good for a girl, and it'll just make you look that much better in comparison. So she's very, very smart here, to try to kind of defend herself in the way that she's defending herself. So if you remember from the bio, she didn't even have, she had to like be sneaky to even get this published. Her brother-in-law had to publish this for her. He had to sneak around and say, oh, she didn't even know I was doing this. She'd be so embarrassed. Of course she knew he was doing it. Are you kidding? She wrote the prologue for it. But everything about it had to kind of play into that Puritan sensibility of what you're supposed to do. It's all very CYA. And I think you know what CYA stands for. So this poem's very smart. It shows her talent. It shows her intelligence. And again, it shows that tension and that balance between who you're supposed to be as a Puritan and who you are and who you want to be. How much of that you're allowed to show. So let's kind of talk about that some more. Let's go to a letter to her husband, absent upon public employment. Now, with Puritans, again, they had very much believed in marriage for love. They very much believed in, showing that was an act of respect for God. She very much loved her husband, and it was very hard for her when he was gone. But again, you have to be careful how much you show that. You have to be careful that you're not seen as this kind of lustful or wanton person, that your highest love is still God, that you're not putting your mortal or carnal desires above that. So again, there's that strike of balance here. And again, once again, she's using this very pagan imagery to show that kind of conflict between the spirit and the flesh. And that is just the thread throughout all of her poetry, is that constant tension between the spirit and the flesh. And it's a very beautiful poem. It's so full of desire and loss. My head, my heart, mine eyes, my life, nay, more. she says of her husband. My joy, my magazine of earthly store. If two be one as surely thou and I, how stayest thou there, whilst I at Ipswich lie? So many steps, head from the heart to sever, if but a neck should soon we be together. And then she starts talking about pagan stuff. So she starts out with, you are my everything. And that's the kind of language you should really, if you're pagan, or if you're Puritan, you should kind of only talk about God that way. But then she moves on. I, like the earth this season, mourn in black. My sun is so far gone in zodiac. Now, typically that's constellation talk. So she's using it to talk about the seasons, right? She's like, I, like the earth, I'm dead. Nothing's growing. I'm winter. Whom whilst I joyed, nor storms nor frost I felt, his warmth such frigid colds did cause to melt. My chilled limbs now numbed lie forlorn. Return, return, sweet soul, from Capricorn. That is getting so close to blasphemy. Soul is sun. Who else is named sun? Who else is the sun? Is Jesus, right? So she's getting super, super close to connecting her husband with Jesus and the warmth of Jesus. And she's ascribing to him these things that typically are put into religious poetry to describe a relationship with Jesus. She's having to use a lot of, again, she's putting it in these kind of pagan terms in this. This poem is really pushing the bounds of acceptability. This is a ballsy poem. In this dead time, alas, what can I more than view those fruits which through thy heat I bore? Okay, again, like that's sexual. I miss you so much. Well, all I can do is look at your children, which through thy heat I bore. Wow, that's a line. So she's connecting him with Jesus. She's waiting for a second coming. She's using pagan imagery. She's very close to talking dirty. Which sweet contentment yield me for a space, true living pictures of their father's face. O strange effect, now thou art southward gone, I weary grow the tedious day so long. But when thou northward to me shall return, I wish my sun may never set, but burn within the cancer of my growing breast. And again, it's a zodiac reference. That's not like a disease reference. The welcome house of him, my dearest guest. And then she brings up that biblical talk again. Flesh of thy flesh, bone of thy bone. I here, thou there, yet both but one. And that's how she skirts the rules, right? Is tying that back into the religious language. Saying, what do you want me to feel? Like, these are the vows that we took to be flesh of one flesh. To put aside one family for each other. Like, this is what the Bible wants us to do. So why are you mad, bro? She pushes it. These are some very confessional poems. They're very open about her feelings. And they really stand up. I mean, in a modern world, I mean, these are still very powerful poems. And she talks, I mean, again, about, first of all, her frustration and that the prologue about not being taken seriously. This is about longing and desire and loss. And then she really talks about loss again. Here follows some verses upon the burning of our house. And this is probably her most famous poem. And in this one, it's not as complex of a poem. Technically speaking, it's not as complicated. But the kind of emotion that she's talking about here is so universal. But again, she's really having to kind of balance what is expected of her as a Puritan woman with what she's feeling. So, you know, the fearful sound of fire and fire. She wakes up and her house is on fire. And she says, let no man know is my desire. That doesn't mean she wanted her house to burn down. That means the opposite. So she jumps up. And of course, this is a little bit of a long poem. To my God, my heart did cry to strengthen me in my distress and not to leave me succorless. So she wakes up and the first thing she says is, oh God, please no. Don't let this happen. But you're Puritan, you believe in predestination. Think about how hard that would have to be for a Puritan person. You believe in predestination. You believe that all this stuff is written for a reason, but you still have these very human emotions. You still believe that it's gonna hurt, right? It's gonna hurt when you lose your home. You're gonna be afraid of what's gonna happen next, right? But you believe it was meant to be. And you also believe that if you have too negative of emotions, if you're tempted into sin, that in and of itself shows that you're not elect and that you're going to hell. And that's a lot to put on a person who's dealing with the crisis. It removes your outlet. So this poem is like her way of trying to balance those emotions. Coming out, beheld a space, the flame consume my dwelling place. And when I could no longer look, I blessed his name that gave and took. I mean, you can just feel the tension in that line, right? I had to watch it burn down. And when I just couldn't take it anymore, I'm going to be Puritan. I'm going to rely back on my beliefs. Yea, so it was, and so 'twas just. It was his own, it was not mine. I mean, you can feel her trying to convince herself, right? He might have all justly bereft, but yet sufficient for us left. When by the ruins oft I passed, my sorrowing eyes aside to cast. She's so honest about how hard this is for her. She's not pretending that it was just, oh, well, you know, God gives, God takes away. Okay, it's fine. It's how it's supposed to be. She says, yeah, I looked at the things, or the places where the things used to be. Wow, that was my chest where all my really nice things used to go. All my best stuff I put in there for safekeeping, and poof, it's gone. God's will. And then she even says, adieu, adieu, all's vanity. Then straight again my heart to chide. Did thy wealth on earth abide? Did fixed thy hope on mouldering dust? And you can kind of hear the echo of Winthrop's speech, where he actually uses this very idea as one of his arguments about charity, where he says, okay, you can save all you want to, but, I mean, stuff rusts, stuff burns, stuff gets stolen, mice eat it, so things happen to your plans. She's watching that happen to her plans. And she's reminding herself, we were told that this happens. I just got to remember. So, I mean, you can see that kind of tension of her trying to balance just the feelings of being a person with the belief system of Puritan belief. It would have been really hard and dangerous if people got the wrong idea and thought that she wasn't expressing it correctly. People were exiled for more than this. Now, the Scrooby separatists were happy enough to live and let live as long as nobody messed with them. They had their own little society and they lived their own way. The Puritans were a lot more theocratic than that. You couldn't vote if you weren't a church member, for example. They did routinely exile people from their communities who didn't live by their rules. For example, Anne Hutchinson is somebody you can look up. The Antinomian controversy it's a big story. A lot of people ended up being murdered by natives because they were exiled to live on their own outside of city walls. But that's kind of the risk she's running here. And she's a wonderful poet. I'm very glad that we have her poems to help us get this insight into what that was like. So we don't all just think that it's kind of this robotic, burn the witch, because it wasn't. It was a very complicated life, and people still had human emotions, and they still had to deal with them. And Anne Bradstreet's poetry is showing us really what that would have been like.